The rain came without warning that morning, like the sky had been holding its breath too long and finally let go. The truck coughed once, twice, then died completely on a back road no map bothered to name. Sarah sat behind the wheel, hands still gripping it, listening to the silence that followed. Beside her, in the passenger seat, her dog lay with his head on his paws. Amber eyes watching her with the patience of something that had learned not to ask questions. His name was Bear. Though he was lean now, ribs visible beneath rust-colored fur. A shepherd mix she'd found 3 years ago, back when she still had an apartment, a job, a life that made sense. Now they shared everything. A sleeping bag. A half-empty bag of kibble. The slow unraveling of days that had no destination. She looked through the rain-streaked windshield at the forest beyond. Trees dense and dark, their branches weaving overhead like a roof with too many holes. Somewhere in there, she remembered, was a place her grandfather used to talk about. A hunting cabin he'd built decades ago, back when land was cheap and solitude was something people sought, instead of stumbled into. She hadn't thought about it in years. But memory had a way of surfacing when options ran out. "Come on, boy," she murmured, opening the door. Bear followed without hesitation, shaking off rain as they stepped into the mud. Sarah grabbed her backpack, everything she owned compressed into 30 pounds of necessity, and started walking. The path was barely there, overgrown with ferns and blackberry vines that caught on her jeans. Bear moved ahead, nose low, tail sweeping cautiously. The rain softened to mist, then stopped altogether, leaving the air thick and damp. After an hour, the cabin appeared. It sat in a small clearing, hunched and crooked, like something that had been trying to stand for too long and finally given up. The roof sagged in the middle, shingles missing in patches. One window was boarded, the other cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The porch steps had rotted through, leaving only the frame. Bear circled it once, sniffing, then looked back at her. Sarah approached slowly, testing each step. The door hung on one hinge, swollen with moisture. She pushed it open with her shoulder, and it gave with a groan that felt almost human. Inside, the air was colder than outside, stale and heavy. The floor was dirt in places where boards had rotted away. A rusted stove sat in the corner, its pipe dangling uselessly. A single chair lay on its side near the back wall, but the walls stood. The ceiling, despite its sag, hadn't collapsed. And in the far corner, a stone fireplace waited. Blackened but intact, Bear stepped inside, sniffed the floor, then sat near the fireplace. Tail thumping once. Sarah exhaled slowly. "Okay, just for tonight." She cleared a space near the fireplace, swept debris aside with her boot, and unrolled her sleeping bag. Bear curled beside her immediately, pressing his warmth against her leg. That night, she built a small fire using dry kindling she found beneath the floorboards. The flames caught slowly, reluctant, but eventually settled into a steady glow. Bear's eyes reflected the light, watching her as she sat with her arms wrapped around her knees. Tomorrow she'd figure out what came next. Tonight they had walls. Morning came pale and cold. Sarah woke to Bear licking her hand, his way of saying it was time to move. She sat up, muscles stiff, and looked around the cabin in daylight. It was worse than she'd thought. The roof leaked in 3 places. The floor had gaps wide enough to see dirt below. But the fireplace worked, and that was something. She spent the day exploring, Bear at her side. Behind the cabin, she found a creek, narrow but clear, water running over smooth stones. Nearby, a shed leaned precariously, its door missing. Inside she found tools. A rusted saw, a hammer with a loose head, nails scattered in a coffee can dot. She carried them back to the cabin. One at a time, Bear following patiently. That evening, she patched the worst hole in the roof using the tarp she'd carried in her pack. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep rain out. Bear watched from below, tail wagging occasionally, as if approving her progress. By the end of the first week, she'd established a rhythm. Wake at dawn. Check the trap she'd set for small game. Gather firewood. Patch, repair, clean. Bear became her assistant, fetching sticks, alerting her to sounds she couldn't hear, lying beside her when exhaustion made her hands shake. One afternoon, while prying up a rotten floorboard, she found something underneath. A small metal box, rusted shut. She worked it open with the edge of the hammer dot inside, yellowed photographs. A man and a woman standing in front of the cabin, smiling. The cabin looked new in the photo, proud. On the back, in faded pencil, our first home. 1967. Sarah stared at the image for a long time. Someone had loved this place once. Someone had built it, lived in it, left it behind. She tucked the photo into her pocket and kept working. By the second week, the cabin had changed. Small improvements, but meaningful. The door closed properly. The fire drew cleanly. She'd replaced enough floorboards to walk without fear of falling through. Bear had changed too. His ribs were still visible, but less so. His coat had regained some shine. He moved with more energy, tail higher, eyes brighter. One morning, she heard an engine in the distance. Bear's ears pricked up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A truck appeared at the edge of the clearing. An older man stepped out, wearing a faded flannel jacket and a cap that had seen better years. He looked at the cabin, then at Sarah, then at Bear, who stood protectively in front of her. Easy boy, Sarah said quietly. The man raised his hand slightly. Didn't mean to startle you. Just saw smoke from the road. Wanted to make sure nobody was in trouble. Sarah studied him. His face was weathered but kind, eyes that carried the weight of having seen people at their worst and still choosing to help. Just staying here for a bit, she said carefully. He nodded slowly. This your family's place? My grandfather built it. Long time ago. He smiled faintly. Thought I recognized the style. He helped my dad build our barn back in the 70s. Good man. Sarah's throat tightened. Yeah, he was. The man gestured to the cabin. You're fixing it up. Trying to. He walked closer, slowly, letting Bear sniff his hand. The dog hesitated, then allowed it, tail giving a cautious wag. Name's Tom, he said. Live about 3 miles east. If you need anything, nails, tools, whatever, let me know. Why would you help me? Tom shrugged. Because folks around here remember when things were hard. And because that cabin deserves to stand a little longer. He left a box of supplies in the truck bed before driving away. Nails, wood screws, a tarp that wasn't full of holes, and a bag of dog food. Sarah sat on the porch steps, Bear beside her, staring at the box. She hadn't cried in months, but her eyes burned now. Bear nudged her hand gently. We're okay, she whispered. Over the next month, Tom returned twice. Once with lumber scraps from a demolition project. Once with a kerosene lamp and a thermos of coffee. You're doing good work, he said simply each time. Sarah didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. The cabin transformed slowly. She replaced the broken window with plastic sheeting Tom had brought. She reinforced the porch steps. She cleared the area around the cabin, pulling weeds, stacking firewood in neat rows. Bear helped in his own way. He'd alert her to approaching weather, pawing at the door when storms were coming. He'd find things in the woods, a lost hammer, a coil of wire, and bring them back like offerings. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Sarah looked at him. "You're smarter than most people I've known." Bear's tail thumped against the floor. By the third month, the cabin was livable. Not just survivable, livable. The roof held. The floor was solid. The fire drew properly, filling the space with warmth. Sarah had even built a small porch railing using branches lashed together with wire. It wasn't professional, but it was sturdy. Tom visited again, this time bringing a woman with him. His wife Marie, who carried a basket covered with a cloth. "Heard you've been working miracles," Mary said, setting the basket on the porch. Inside were fresh bread, eggs wrapped in newspaper, and a jar of honey. Sarah's voice caught. "I can't pay you back." Marie waved her hand. "You already are. This cabin's been an eyesore for 20 years. Now it looks like somebody cares." That night, Sarah and Bear shared the bread by the fire. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months. She gave Bear a piece, and he ate it delicately, eyes never leaving her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. Winter came early that year. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains, covering the clearing in white. Sarah had prepared as best she could. Firewood stacked high. Traps checked daily. A small root cellar dug beneath the floorboards where she stored what little food she had. Bear's coat thickened, and he spent most days curled by the fire, only venturing out when necessary. One morning, Sarah woke to find the door frozen shut. She had to heat water and pour it along the frame before it would open. Outside, the world was buried. Trees bowed under the weight of snow. The path to the creek was invisible. Bear stepped out carefully, sniffing the air, then looked back at her as if to say, "This is bad." She nodded. "Yeah, but we'll manage." They did. Barely. There were days when the fire was the only thing keeping them alive. Days when she rationed food so carefully that hunger became a constant companion. Days when Bear refused to eat unless she did first. But the cabin held. The roof didn't collapse. The walls kept the wind out. And every morning, when Sarah woke to see Bear's steady breathing beside her, she felt something that might have been hope. One particularly harsh night, when the temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows, Bear suddenly stood. Growling low. Sarah grabbed the flashlight, heart pounding. "What is it?" Bear moved to the door, ears forward, hackles raised. She opened the door a crack. In the beam of her flashlight, she saw them. Eyes reflecting back. Wolves, 3 of them, lean and hungry. Standing at the edge of the clearing, Bear barked once. Sharp and commanding. The wolves hesitated, then melted back into the darkness. Sarah closed the door, hands shaking. She knelt beside Bear, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You saved us." Bear licked her face once, then returned to his spot by the fire as if nothing had happened. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly. The snow melted in patches, revealing mud and dead grass. But beneath it, green shoots began to push through. Crocuses, wild onions. Signs of life returning. Sarah planted a small garden beside the cabin using seeds Tom had brought. Beans, carrots, tomatoes. Bear supervised. Lying in a patch of sun, tail occasionally thumping approval. One afternoon, while she was weeding, a car pulled up. Not Tom's truck, but something newer, cleaner. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, wearing jeans and a windbreaker. She looked at the cabin, then at Sarah, then smiled. "I heard someone was restoring this place," she said. "I'm Julia. I work with the County Housing Assistance Program." Sarah stood slowly, wary. "I'm not squatting illegally. This was my grandfather's land." Julia raised her hands. "I'm not here to evict you. I'm here to help." She explained that the county had a program for people restoring abandoned properties. If Sarah could prove family connection and show she was improving the land, they could help with materials, maybe even legal paperwork. Sarah stared. "Why?" "Because we've lost too many places like this. And because you're doing something most people wouldn't even attempt." Over the next 6 months, with Julia's help, Sarah obtained legal ownership of the cabin and the surrounding 5 acres. The county provided materials. Tom and Marie rallied neighbors, and one weekend, a dozen people showed up to help. They replaced the entire roof, built a proper porch, installed a wood stove that actually worked. Someone even brought glass for the windows. Bear greeted everyone, tail wagging, as if hosting a party he'd been planning for months. By the end of the day, the cabin looked like something from a postcard. Restored, proud, alive. Julia handed Sarah a folder. Inside, the deed to the property, officially in her name. "It's yours," Julia said. "You earned it." Sarah couldn't speak. She just nodded, eyes burning. That evening, after everyone left, Sarah sat on the new porch with Bear beside her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. She scratched behind Bear's ears. "We did it, boy. We made it home." Bear's tail thumped against the porch boards, a steady, contented rhythm. The years that followed were quiet but full. Sarah took odd jobs in town, enough to buy food and supplies. The cabin became known locally as the place that came back. People started showing up. Not many, but enough. A teenager kicked out by his parents. A woman fleeing an abusive partner. An elderly man whose trailer had burned down. Sarah couldn't turn them away. She'd been them. The cabin expanded. A small addition here. A shed converted to a sleeping space there. Nothing fancy, but warm, safe, steady. Bear grew older, his muzzle graying, his steps slower. But every morning, he still greeted Sarah with the same patient devotion, and every night, he still curled beside her by the fire. One autumn evening, years after they'd first arrived, Sarah sat on the porch watching leaves fall. Bear lay beside her, breathing slow and even. Tom and Marie had visited earlier, bringing apple pie and news that another family was looking for shelter. "We'll make room," Sarah had said. Now in the quiet, she thought about how far they'd come. From a broken truck on a nameless road to this, a place people came to when they needed a door that stayed open. Bear shifted, resting his head on her lap. She stroked his ears. "You know, I wouldn't have made it without you." Bear's tail moved once, slowly, as if to say, "I know." The cabin's windows glowed warm in the fading light. Inside, voices murmured, soft and grateful. Outside, the forest breathed, patient and eternal. Sarah looked down at Bear, at the dog who'd stayed through everything, and whispered, "Thank you." Bear sighed contentedly, eyes closing. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Sarah felt complete.